So welcome today. I think it's our fifth conversation, and it's very nice that I know very well both the speakers today. They've been associated with me for 30 or 40 years since I started dealing with Jewish music. But of course, they were already experts in Jewish music. I was the newcomer on the block. So Malcolm Singer was very, very instrumental in everything that I did because he was so powerful in Jewish music. He was, at that time, the director of the Zemel Choir, and we did some amazing things together in York Minster and Canterbury Cathedral, and he got me involved in City University, which led to the lectureship in Jewish music that Alexander Knapp had, and further afield. Malcolm then became the director, Malcolm Singer we're talking about, of music at the Yehudi Menuhin School. And of course, the Jewish Music Institute did a number of wonderful things with the Yehudi Menuhin School. So Malcolm, both Malcolms are really important to the trajectory of the Jewish Music Institute and the work that I did. So it's really special to have them both here today. Malcolm Miller, musicologist, pianist, always had so many interesting ideas of things to do and ways to write about them and get them done. So he is a lecturer at the Open University, lecturer at City Lit and Morley College, but he is a writer, instigator, thinker, planner, and so it's really wonderful that they're going to talk to each other today. So please welcome the two Malcolms, Singer and Miller. And if everybody else will mute themselves or whatever, I'll do the same.
Well, thank you very much. I think I will kick off with some technical stuff. But before I do so, just to say thank you. First of all, to our hosts at UCLA, Mark, and your team, Laurie, and everyone in Hanover, who may not be here, but Marta in Dresden, and everyone who's contributed to making these talks, putting them on. And of course, to Malcolm Singer. We're going to probably get confused in the Q&A, but I noticed that you've got a lot of supporters here, so we'll get through the Malcolm issue. In fact, I remember at one point I had to give us a long time ago, Malcolm Singer joined what's called the Royal Society of Musicians. I don't know if you remember that, Malcolm.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A while ago.
Yeah.
And I do a little sort of introduction to Malcolm, and there were various other Malcolms. Malcolm Williamson, who was a composer, who was a member of the Royal Society, and Malcolm Troop, who's the pianist, and Malcolm Lipkin, of course, wonderful composer. And so I had to devise this sort of rather unusual conversation where somebody would call up to say, you know, a concert of Malcolm Troop, is Malcolm there? And they said, no, he's rehearsing on stage. They said, well, there's Malcolm there. Yes, but he's sitting in the stalls with his music at the moment. Well, there's Malcolm there. Well, he's doing a review. So none of the Malcolms were free. They were all involved in this one concert. Anyway, here we are. And I want to just say it's a great pleasure for me to be here interviewing or chatting, hopefully, with Malcolm about his music. And I've known Malcolm for several decades. I won't say how many, as a friend as well as a professional colleague. And I often talk about his music when I'm lecturing or giving a talk about Jewish music, but also I've been very fortunate over the years to review many of his works which wouldn't fall into that category. A great variety of chamber music and operas for children and all sorts of interesting works. And really it is a great and very interesting output. And so I hope that will discuss the relationship really of Jewish music and in his work. For me, his music making has always radiated a very original and dynamic style, questing and purposeful. And I'm just going to quote myself, writing in 2004 at a concert of his music in St. John's, Smithscare, where I said that his music has a stylistic thread, I'm quoting now, aesthetic integrity and a predilection for quasi-minimalist processes, energetic rhythmic polyphony, and a keen sense of expressive shape, which gives him a unique place in the pantheon of postmodernism. I don't usually quote myself, but I had to do that one. In fact, this talk is very well timed because I think we're at the point at which some of the Grove online entries are being updated. And I'm hoping to update Malcolm's, which I wrote about 20 years ago. And since there's been a lot of activity since then, not least that he's actually completed, I noticed he's completed being the longest serving director of music at the Yehudi Menuhin School, which he retired from in 2017, and which he started being the director of in 1998. So that's nearly 20 years, but had actually already been teaching there about from the late 70s. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Malcolm's music in a little bit of detail, and we've got lots of nice examples. Malcolm and I have been sort of in touch, getting these sound and some video files ready. But before we do, I just want to introduce it by saying that, in fact, I was back in touch with Malcolm very recently because he had a premiere of a piece performed in a lockdown concert, and it was called the Lockdown Suite, which I then reviewed online because it was lockdown, which can be seen in an online magazine. So I wanted to start, Malcolm, by asking you just generally, how have you fared? I mean, everyone's in the same boat, really. I just wanted to ask you how you fared during lockdown, not only sort of personally, obviously, the things that we all have to do, like washing up the shopping as it comes on the front doorstep, and that's it, but also, you know, how you creatively dealt with the challenges, composing, conducting, teaching, all those things that you normally do. How's it affected you, and have you found it restraining or a challenge, or, you know, what?
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. Thank you very much for being here. Lockdown's been really interesting. I mean, I retired from the Menuhin School in 2017, but I teach composition at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which I've always done, but I've kind of expanded that since my, in inverted commas, retirement, which is, of course, not really a retirement at all, because musicians don't retire and composers don't stop composing. So in fact, my teaching at Guildhall has carried on online, and my students have all gone back to their homes all over the world. There's one in Davis, California, for example, and one in Greece at the moment, one in Turkey. So I've been teaching online, and in fact, particularly in the first month of lockdown, the students needed a lot of support. So actually, I think all of us teachers at Guildhall were giving them more time than we would just seeing them for an hour a week at Guildhall. Mostly one-to-one teaching, 1 or 2 seminars with big groups like this. So I had to learn Zoom and sharing and lecturing on Zoom. So I've been busy with that. And then one of my ex-students suggested writing these, he was going to write a two-part invention every day for the first bit of lockdown. So so that kind of inspired me to, I didn't want to write 2-part inventions, but it inspired me to write my Lockdown Suite, which is a set of short pieces written kind of one a day, more or less, at the start of the lockdown period. So I've been composing, and then we got to the difficult time of examining at Guildhall. So I've been examining online, not just composers, also examining classical improvisation, which I do as an external examiner. So we've had people improvising in Australia and Mexico and China and goodness knows what, and listening to them and examining them. And I normally teach a summer course, which comes up at the beginning of August. And my students who come to that have persuaded me to teach that online. So at the moment, I'm working out how I'm going to teach my summer course online and somehow have an online concert of the students' works in August. So it's been a busy lockdown. And in the middle of all that, I've been in hospital for an operation, nothing to do with COVID, I'm pleased to say. And as you will see, I'm pretty well recovered now. So it's been a busy lockdown, but productive.
No, yeah, well, we wish you well. Yeah, no, it sounds absolutely amazing. And I remember when about the Lockdown Suite, which we might talk about later on, One of the pieces is called Baby Talk, and I think there was something to do with one of your family members. Is that right?
My first grandchild was 1 year old, and of course we couldn't see him and go and have a party with him, and so I wrote this little piece, which is the last piece in the set, called Baby Talk, inspired by the sort of noises he made on the piano. So
it's a great way of using music.
Hear it at the end. And then there have been other lockdown concerts which have been nice. So I'm quite involved with something called the Shipley Festival down in West Sussex, and I was supposed to be conducting in May there, and so they turned it into an online concert instead. And some of you may have seen the Shipley Psalms already, which fortunately we had a really good audio recording of the premiere 2 years ago, and one of the wonderful technicians down there has added the visuals that you see with my texts and with the text of the Psalms, and stained glass windows from Chichester Cathedral, the Chagall windows and things. So I was busy with that, and then the Orpheus Symphonia, which is an orchestra I'm involved in, has been doing online concerts. And I did one of these sessions of I was being interviewed and some of my pieces were being played, including that premiere of the Lockdown Suite. So it's been really busy in a very productive way, very different.
Yeah. Well, I've obviously been, working closely with the people who are doing all these lockdown concerts and doing interviews. And in fact, that sort of leads on to the topic of the first piece that I want to sort of introduce. I mean, we put the link up to the Shipley Psalms. Hopefully some people here might have actually heard the whole thing, but I'm not banking on that, but you'll find the link on the site afterwards, anyone. But I have got a few examples to share, because I actually wanted to discuss a little bit of detail about this very recent piece. It's a 2018 piece, Malcolm. So it's sort of one of the recent ones, and it comes into Jewish music, which was supposed to be the topic of the other topic apart from lockdown. So it's a lockdown concert of a piece of Jewish music. So perfect, and played in a church. What's even more interesting. So my first question, of course, will be: is it Jewish music? But I won't ask that yet. What I thought we could do, I'm just going to share screen now. So having had our portraits zoomed up in front of everybody, we're going to disappear for a while. Is that all right? You don't mind that? Everybody will sort of decide whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage. But anyway, here we go. I've got to just open up the PowerPoint and actually expand it so that I can show the slideshow from the beginning. I hope that's visible, and is that audible? Wait, we don't know actually. Before I do that, let me just do that again.
We can see you.
I might have to do something to do with the sound. Sorry about this technical issue. Let me just stop sharing a second. Am I sharing?
No.
I'm not sharing. Okay, I'll share again. Here we go. Yeah.
Now we're sharing.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm wondering whether we should just go straight into talking about the music, and then we'll talk a little bit about the background of this piece and some of the influences and the connections on it. But just I thought maybe have a couple of minutes of music. What I'll describe is what's coming next, if that's okay with you, Malcolm. It's a setting of 4 psalms, 4 sections, and the unifying element of, in a sense, is the violin ritornello, as I call it. It's a sort of recurring introductory solo which comes back in different forms in the middle of the piece and then comes back at the end in a sort of starting on the same tone, which is G sharp. We will talk about the G sharp in a second, why it's a G sharp. And then the Psalm 96 begins in the choir. We've got a little bit of contrast between a slow section and then a slightly faster section, and that will end this brief extract of the beginning of the piece. So here we go. It starts rather quietly.
it died.
Sorry. Sorry. I'll just hear the very very brief last part of that first section. Oops. Okay, so just a little taste of it, really. So Malcolm, so just to begin with, I mean, I mentioned a few technical points there. Is there anything you want to say about that extract? I mean, there were, I pointed out the violin, and what seems to me to be sort of really unusual about this piece is the fact that it's a solo violin with a choir, which is, there are not that many works for solo violin and chorus.
No.
And the other thing is, the sort of the sound world that you've created there, which has this sort of very awesome or awe-inspiring, let's say, feel to it. It's sort of slightly unnerving, I would say. Can you talk a little bit about this harmonic?
Well, yes. Let's talk about the writing of the piece first of all. So Andrew Bernardi, who essentially commissioned it and is the violinist, he runs the Shipley Festival in West Sussex, and he also teaches at Trinity College, and he has a wonderful young string academy down in West Sussex. He is a force to be reckoned with in music in West Sussex. And when I was at the Menuhin School as director of music about 13 or 14 years ago, he approached me to see if the Menuhin School would go and do some work in the community in West Sussex and work with his young players there as well. So over the last more than a decade, most years I'd done projects with him, with the Menuhin School, sometimes with my music. He commissioned another piece for me called The Margrave's Dream, which is violin, flute, harpsichord and strings, a kind of companion piece to Brandenburg Concerto. So I'd worked with him before, and a few years ago he acquired a Stradivarius, the one that got lost at King's Cross Station and then turned up about 3 years later.
I was in the news, yes.
Yes, there was a big hoo-ha when it disappeared, and in fact, the young violinist who owned it and lost it has since written a really interesting book about it, and she's not very polite about Andrew because she couldn't buy it back, and he got it when the police finally found it. Anyway, that's another story. He commissioned the piece. He wanted me to write this piece for violin and choir for their festival. And of course, they're not far from Chichester. And in fact, John Snelling, who funded the commission, was involved in commissioning the Chichester Psalms from Bernstein back in the mid 1960s. So the idea was to have a piece that would be a kind of companion piece to the Chichester Psalms, and Chichester Psalms was done in the same concert as this down in Staining Parish Church. So there's lots and lots of really nice connections, and I know Andrew very well. I know his playing very well. He then asked the Royal Holloway Choir to sing it, which was tremendous. I'd never worked with them before, and they learned the Hebrew text amazingly very quickly, and they did a tremendous job with it, and they were a real joy to work with. So that's kind of the history of the piece. And of course 2018 was Bernstein's centenary, and I was lucky enough to know Leonard Bernstein a little bit and work with him a little bit in my student years in Paris when Bernstein's in Paris a lot. So, and I've worked on the Chichester Psalms many times, conducting it, acting as the pronunciation coach for the BBC singers. I conducted it in Haifa and all around the UK. So the Chichester Psalms were a piece very close to my heart. So the idea of writing this companion piece, that's how it all came about. And then I had a free rein. I mean, they wanted it to be Psalms, they wanted it to be in Hebrew, and they wanted it for violin and choir. So I was given that brief. That's the brief I was given to write the piece.
Fantastic. So how did you go about choosing the particular Psalms or the sections of the Psalms? And when you are, let's, for example, I've just got one of them, the first section up, when you sort of looked at the text, did you come up with some sort of strategy? How did you go about it?
Well, I mean, I've set a lot of Psalms, as we'll see it today before. So I reread all the Psalms again, and a lot of them are not the kind of texts I would like to set. I tend to come towards, from the late 90s onwards. Mostly, I set the Psalms at the end, and of course, these are the 96 is a joyous Psalm, and I mean, really boring things like how long they are plays a part in which Psalms I choose, or whether I do want to just set a little bit of a Psalm and pick out verses. So for the last Psalm in the fourth movement, I just take four verses out of whatever there is, 26 verses. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the text before I start on the music at all. Right. And in fact, in this case, I wrote each of the movements, and I didn't even think about the overall structure to begin with. I just wrote the movements, and then I ordered them as I would get to the end of the writing, I think.
In terms of text setting, are there particular Hebrew settings that come to? I mean, it was the Chichester Psalms. I mean, there are other Steve Reich or something, or so earlier Hebrew psalm settings, composers from Israel or earlier Jewish composers. Did you take into account some aspects of Hebrew language setting? This was 2018, so you'd already had quite a lot of experience, as you say.
I obviously grew up in the synagogue as a very young child in the Orthodox synagogue, and then from about the age of 10 in the Reform movement. But it was only really when I started conducting the Zemel Choir, which was in '83, when I came back from California. I mean, as I was saying before you all came on, and I was talking to our friends in UCLA. I was at Stanford from 1980 to 1982. When I came back, I got the opportunity to become the musical director of the Zemel Choir. So it's only really then, and I did that for 10 years till '93, that I really got to know Jewish music and conducted so many psalm settings of composers. I mean, Ben Chaim Setter, Yeheshkel Brown, Zvi Avni, who you had on this, and I've worked with Menachem Wiesenberg and Moshe Raziuk, who's here today. So I feel I've, from those 10 years of conducting, I really got inside the language, and then from just being in a Reform synagogue and hearing psalms in regular services.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variety.
Yeah, and of course, sorry, just to finish with Zemel, I conducted a lot of Salamani de Rossi.
Yeah,
which I love.
So very different type of Hebrew. I mean, they're different eras have different ways of setting the word. So I mean, in this one, you chose to set the whole text of this first movement, but what you do is you sort of slow some parts up, and others you sort of race through. Very, very rhythmic, really bubbly, buoyant type of textures. So it is, as you say, there's a sort of joyous also. But I was wondering about the harmony. You've got this very, in a way, it's sort of, it's exciting. It gets you on edge. The harmonic language there.
Yes.
And so, could you say a little bit about that?
Yes, harmony.
How does it work? It sounds modal. It's sort of in between.
Well, I have a reputation as a teacher of harmony, but I never use the word harmony because I find it really means so many different things to so many different people. I think for this piece, I think, in fact, for most of my music, I think very horizontally. So I'm trying to write music that singers are going to enjoy singing. And that's both to do with the contours and the intervals and the pitching. So you asked before we heard it about the G sharp at the beginning. Right. I mean, I suppose this piece kind of brings together the two threads of my musical career, which is strings and voices. Right. Because as director of music at the Menuhin School, I was listening to string players, every day of the year, more or less, and for many, many hours. And I grew up. I played the violin and viola as a boy as well. So the G sharp is a note I love because of the timbre you get on a violin. It's the first stop note on the lowest string. And then the D, where the singing starts, is a note that is for all the voices. The sopranos and altos can both sing it in the high register, and the tenors and basses can both sing that same top D. So the tritone relationship, which I like in a lot of my music. So that kind of just coincidentally came together very, very nicely from my point of view. And in this piece, I use something that I've never really used in my music until recently, which is the octatonic scale, which I teach a lot and talk about a lot, and Stravinsky and Bartok use a lot, and it's kind of the staple scale in the 20th century, but I never used it in my music. But I just before I wrote this piece, I wrote a E-flat clarinet piece called Clarion Call, E-flat clarinet and piano, and I started using the octatonic scale as something which I found suited what the musical language I wanted to use now, and it's nice to sing. So that's how I started working on it, really. And I just wrote the line. I mean, I go through the text, I work out where I want the stresses to be, and I felt that opening Shiru Ladonai is really a kind of fanfare-y sound, and then a lot of text to get through. So I have that long fast section in the middle, and then come back out at the end and finish quietly and slowly to prepare us for the second movement.
Yes, I mean, one thing that comes across is the tritone, the emphasis of in the violin part as it's driving up, and then in the sort of the melody of the vocal melody.
I think the tritone provides a kind of question mark always, and I'm always happier with that kind of ambiguous language rather than. I mean, I don't consider is Joe your uncle or your great uncle or your cousin? Or,
yes, my uncle.
Your uncle. He and I down the years have teased each other. He always talks about my tonal music, and I always say to him, I don't think in terms of tonal music. I don't think triadically at all. No. So I'm thinking into actual pictures. But I like that tritone dividing of the octave, and that features a lot in this.
No, but that's actually great. It sort of brings us on to another topic, which is we'll just move off a little bit because you mentioned a little bit about your career. So just to just to quickly go over your the trajectory, as it were, that took you here. I'm just trying to get to the next. Is this sharing?
You can see the Psalms at the moment. Yes.
Here we go. I've done a little biography there just to sweep through your career with a number of questions, because you mentioned this thing about triadic harmony and the thing, but in fact there's definitely an interesting confluence of different type of influences from, let's say, the period after Cambridge, where you were studying with Ligeti and Boulanger, and you say that that's the time where you met Bernstein as well, and then you were writing electroacoustic music as well in Stanford. Is that right? A couple of pieces.
Yes.
One of them was selected for the ICSM, the ISCM. So you obviously were sort of very interested in, let's say, non-tonal or post-tonal in the sort of conventional language. What I was interested in is how you think. Do you feel that your style evolved from that phase, like when you started with the Zemel and then writing Jewish choral music or choral music setting of psalms in Hebrew and that sort of thing? Was there, did you take a sideways step from that? Were you continuing the process?
I mean, my earlier pieces that you talk about, well, first of all, the pieces I did at Stanford in California were all computer pieces. Well, one of them was just computer pieces. One was with professional musicians and computer-produced sounds. So one can write much more complicated music when one's working with professional musicians. But I suppose when I came back to England post-California, I started working a lot with amateurs and a lot with children. And so the music I write is when people ask me to write for them. It's mostly I get commissioned through performers who want to play my music. And so obviously with amateur choirs, one needs to write in a more simple idiom, otherwise they're not going to be able to cope with it. And certainly from working with Zemel for 10 years, I know very well the limitations of amateur choirs. And you get some very, very fine singers and readers in amateur choirs, but you also get people who are not very good readers and not such fine singers. So working with amateur choirs, you know, that has an influence on what I write. Although for this, obviously, we have an excellent semi-professional choir in the Royal Holloway Choir.
When you were with Zemel, you did concerts a lot with cantors. We've heard in this series quite a lot of about Hazanut and cantorial music and synagogue choral music. How was it? A new experience for you, and how did you musically deal with the musical challenges? If
you can say working with cantors is a baptism of fire, then that's what I would say. Some of the very first concert I did with Zemel was with the great Simon Hass, who was coming towards the end of his career, and it was a concert that had been booked before I became director of the Zemel, and he was amazing, but it was a complete nightmare. I'd never conducted anything like that before. He went to the front of the stage, closed his eyes and sang, so he never looked at me once. And trying to second guess where to bring the choir in was when that whole idiom was really quite new to me, because as I say, by that stage, most Jewish music I knew came through the Reform movement, although as a child I'd been used to cantorial music in the Orthodox Church, Orthodox synagogue. And then, but with Zemel, I worked a lot with Alberto Mizrahi. We took Zemel to America. And in fact, he sang with us in Toronto, where I met Charles, who's hopefully still online listening to us in Toronto back in the mid-80s, I suppose that was. And we sang with different cantors all over America on that tour. So every day it was with a different cantor. And of course, we had Robert Brody, who had been a member of Zemel, who often sang with us as our cantor, and people like Victor Tunkel and Danny Tunkel educated me in the ways of cantorial music and the various liturgies. So I learnt on the job, as it were, with Zemel, dealing with cantorial music. Of course, cantorial music is very different from this kind of idiom, really.
Um, yeah, so I mean that brought you into this the possibilities, I suppose, of composing things of Jewish works. I put them in quotes because I mean there are a lot of interesting overlaps, as indeed the Psalms show. It was commissioned by a church, and so the question of boundaries is an interesting one. But what I've got here, I just listed some of the Jewish works that you've written, and the ones that are in bold, actually, the ones we have examples for here. And yes, it seems to start in 1990, which is with your sort of certain amount of years background already working with Zemel. You compose a Kaddish for the BBC Singers. And I mean, I remember I've probably reviewed the premiere of that at the time, and remember the performance. And then you have some other psalms written not only for the BBC Singers, but for the Zemel Choir, but I believe the BBC Singers might have sung them. With all these possibilities opening up, do you want? There was something that you seem to be getting. Sorry, carry on.
Well, when I look at this list of pieces, I mean, these are, when people ask me to write pieces, I write them. I don't sit in a room and just come up with ideas. So the BBC, I'd worked with them on the Chichester Psalms, in fact, as their pronunciation coach, and I'd also done other things with the BBC. I wrote a big piece called Making Music for the BBC Symphony Orchestra and the Robert Mayer concerts, again children's concert, but the BBC Symphony Orchestra. So when they commissioned me, they were quite keen for me to do something in Hebrew. The BBC Singers had just stopped being the choir that sang every morning on the service, so they were just beginning to expand into a new world, and so they quite liked the idea of doing something in Hebrew to show the kind of the new direction that the singers were going in as a concert choir rather than just a church service choir, which is what they were formed to be in the early days. And then York came about because, as Geraldine will tell you, for the anniversary of Clifford's Tower, we did a big event in York, and I wrote the cantata for that. So each of the pieces here was commissioned for a particular reason. Songs of Ascent was commissioned to be a companion piece to the Thomas Tallis, which is why it's a 40-part choir. And then I only really wrote for Zemel once I stopped being their musical director. I didn't write for them. I did a lot of arranging when I was conductor of the choir, but I didn't write for them. I didn't think it was a good idea to mix my composing and conducting particularly. So all the pieces I've written for Zemel have been after I finished being their musical director.
Malcolm, if I could just interject for a quick moment, because we do have a question in the chat from Alex Klein, and it fits really well right here. This is a very big question, but looking at this incredible list of achievements, he's wondering, what are you still hoping to achieve in the music world? What are the goals that still remain for you?
Oh, I just want people to ask me to write music, and I want to write it. I've got more time on my hands writing it now, although I still am teaching and conducting a fair amount. I've done one children's opera. I'd love to tackle another opera, and some larger scale. A lot of these things are small scale pieces, because the way my career has been with a lot of, well, as director of music at the Menuhin School, teaching and managing a whole school, one has to write in the holidays and snatch moments to write. Now I've got more time to write, I could move on to larger scale things. So I think that would be quite fun. I feel kind of ready to do that now. But there are these as Malcolm Miller says, these kind of Jewish works. That's because what people have asked me to write. So that's what I've written.
So let me expand a little bit on Alex's question in terms of synagogue music versus, let's say, concert music. So the pieces listed in this table that have a little asterisk are specifically mentioned as being for services or liturgical purposes, and the other ones not. But is there, do you see a difference? I mean, apart from the fact you mentioned it's got to be accessible, and there's got to be a certain, let's say, directness or ability. Synagogue choirs or congregations have to be able to sing it.
Yeah,
have you been tempted to write more for the synagogue at all? I mean, have you initiated any? moves in that direction.
I don't initiate matter. I get asked to do it. So when I was asked to write for what was the Reform Movement's Jubilee, they specifically wanted a piece. I wrote it in many forms. So it was written for soloists and 4-part choir, but there's also a 3-part SAB version, and there's a single line version as well. So that was very specifically written for that occasion, and therefore it's relatively easy to sing. And I suppose it's in a way the most tuneful, if you like, of anything I've written. The meditation was written very much a very personal thing for me, because Hugo Grin was my rabbi and married my wife and I, and we were close to him. We'd both worked with him and knew him well, and so that's why the meditation came into being. But I wanted to write something that other synagogues could perform, and it gets done quite a lot in British synagogues. No, actually, not only in British synagogues, it gets done all over the place. It's easy to sing, and I think Alan Byers, who's here, does it has been doing it in his synagogue, and West London does it sometimes. I think other synagogues do it. So I wanted that to be fairly straightforward. Psalm 95, Zemel invited me again to write for them. And Psalm 95, if you look at the dome at West London Synagogue, in the dome after the war, they put this inscription, which is the beginning of Psalm 95. So that's why I chose that text. So there's always been a reason for different things.
Yeah, finally, we haven't got an example of that audio, but I know that Psalm setting that you did is a really interesting one, because it sort of evokes the type of resonances of the synagogue, and there's a lot of resonance, echoey, sort of creating a type of echoey heterophony, like all the different sort of lines overlapping. It almost has a Renaissance quality in some ways, but it has a sort of lovely aura. And I was just wondering if you want to maybe comment. We could have 1 or 2 examples. Maybe we could just hear a little bit of the Kaddish, where you sort of have an innovative type of approach to the texture. If there's time, that we can have a little snippet of that one. Is that something we can do?
So Kaddish is not for amateur singers to sing. It is difficult to sing. It is very consonant. You can see some of the score there. Well, let's listen to it, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah. So what I'm showing you in this, what you can. Yeah. Okay. Let's listen to it.
So actually, this piece has the at the top you have 3 sopranos and 3 tenors, I think it is, that stand in an arc at the front, in a semicircle at the front, and then the rest of the 24 singers are kind of a pedal. They're kind of the shadow. And the piece is about 18 minutes without any silence. So you've always got someone holding a quiet pedal in the background. Anyway, let's hear it. If you've got it there.
That's it. So, okay, so that's the close-up here of the final section.
Yeah, so that's they sing that quite freely, and then if you get to the next page, they kind of there's a pause where they can all come together again, and it goes on to the next bit of the text. Yeah. But that kind of sound is the kind of the synagogal sound that I've heard in the Orthodox synagogue in my very, very early years, I think.
So Malcolm, this is what led me to actually sometimes in my reviews compare you with sort of Arvo Pärt and John Tavener. It's the pedal points, which are sort of, you know, give you this amazing aura, and there's a sort of spiritual feeling to it. I mean, it might be distant from what we know as the sort of the traditional setting of the Kaddish, but it certainly has a sort of mesmeric type of effect. What was in your? This is something you developed quite a lot.
Well, I spent a long, long time choosing the text for this commission, and the Kaddish is obviously a very obvious one. But I looked at hundreds of texts, and I remember talking to Rabbi Hugo Grin about it. He was very keen for me to do something with the Cain and Abel story. But I just didn't feel, or possibly the Song of the Sea, which is, you know, the oldest song in the Bible. And they're both still on the back burner for me. Maybe I will get to them one day. But at that stage, I felt happier setting the Kaddish because I knew the rhythm of the language so well. But I wanted to set it as this very, very long, slow kind of meditation rather than the way we gabble through it in services. So I think the pedal point question, I mean, in my amateur music for amateur choirs, it just helps choirs sing if they've got a note to hold on to. But with the BBC singers, that's not an issue. But so many of the pieces, so many pieces written for the BBC singers are so dissonant and so complicated because they can sing anything. And I didn't really want to fall into the trap of writing something that was overly complicated. So I don't really feel that Pärt or Tavener are influences. Well, no, generally speaking, their music doesn't particularly interest me.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to address them right now, but there are several questions coming in the chat, and actually now makes sense for at least a few of them. So from Alex, many choristers in Jewish choirs do not read music. Is that a problem when conducting? We have some interest in the suite from the shtetl. Mark Kligman asks, who are the most important compositional influences? And then from Niels, why did you decide to study with Nadia Boulanger in Paris, and what made her teaching special? So some of these tie together. Feel free to take whichever you'd like.
Okay, let's start at the end with Boulanger. I mean, we could spend the next 3 hours talking about it. I mean, I was, when I finished studying at Cambridge, I got a scholarship to go and study in Paris. And the obvious choice at that time was to try and go to Messiaen or to Boulanger. And I was studying in London with a man called Richard Stoker, who'd studied with Boulanger, and he said I must go to her. And I had met her when I was a teenager when she came over to London. I had actually played one of my compositions for her. And so that's how I got to her. And she was greater than all the legends that you hear about her. And I had an amazing 2 years in Paris with her. I was there from the academic year 74 to 75. Then I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to Ligeti in Hamburg in 75 to 76. And then I came back to Boulanger in 76 to 77. But most of my work with Boulanger was not really to do with composing. It was to become a better musician. So it was harmony and counterpoint and keyboard harmony and analysis. And she would look at my pieces. And after a few lessons, she said, well, you are a composer. Bring me your music when you want to show me something. But really, I want to train you to be a better musician. And I knew that I hadn't got the kind of training that I needed in Cambridge. Cambridge had many wonderful things about it, but actually the education there was not brilliant at that time. And so Boulanger really trained me as a musician. That's what I got from her. So that answers that question. Shtetl music, I think, is probably for another talk, because that's a piece for beginner violinists and string orchestra, using very familiar Jewish themes from Eastern Europe, arranging them in a kind of fantasia. I wrote that piece because I'd conducted a piece by Peter Maxwell Davis for beginner violins and string orchestra based on Scottish folk songs. And a wonderful lady who runs music education in Cambridgeshire heard me conduct the Maxwell Davis and said, you must write a similar piece with beginner violin parts, 3 parts of a kind of the very beginners, slightly more advanced and slightly more advanced violins with a professional string orchestra. And so it seemed to me that since Maxwell Davis had gone with Scottish folk songs, for me the obvious thing to do was to go with Jewish folk songs. And it gets performed a great deal now, I'm pleased to say, all over the place. But it's kind of an arrangement rather than an original composition, although it's more of a kind of fantasia transcription. And as I said earlier, I've done a lot of work with young people. That's 2 questions. I don't remember the other question, the first question. Oh, influences. Very hard to say. Certainly Bach. I always say Bach. Bach and Gershwin are my 2 passions. But most of my influences in my music comes from architecture and reading books and going to the theatre and going to movies, and from things completely outside music that kind of inspire me. But it's not really specific composers. Of course, Ligeti had an enormous influence on me because he was just such an incredible musician, an incredible person to study with. But I don't think you hear Ligeti's music much in mine, although maybe if we get to the lockdown suite at the end, we might be 1 or 2 things that Malcolm Miller wants to talk about relating to that.
There's a question.
Yep.
There's another question there just came up from Lawrence.
All right.
Are you optimistic about the future of the teaching and performance of classical music among the younger generation, and specifically in the field of Jewish commissioned or composed music?
As someone sort of still connected a lot with young people, there are wonderful things going on. There's lots of wonderful music education, not least from the Menuhin School, where I was involved for so many years. I think there is a problem, certainly in the UK, is that most of the children who are learning instruments now are not from working class backgrounds. They are from middle class and upper middle class backgrounds, and it's very. When I grew up in the 60s, there was lots of instrumental teaching free in schools, the Greater London Arts and what have you. So getting into a musical life now is much more difficult. I mean, I came from a musical home, but I got a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music, went there every Saturday throughout my teenage years. There are still some bursaries for those kind of institutions, but it's much harder to do. But there are some wonderful young musicians around.
Should we talk about actually the young musicians? Because I think it's one of the really key things that you've done is to be director of music, and having taught there already before that at the Menuhin School. So, I mean, I think we should talk about the importance of actually Menuhin himself. What was your relationship to him? And also, we've got a couple of pieces where you actually are writing them in memorial tribute to him, and also in the sort of secondary, indirect way, citing Ernest Bloch. So it's a sort of an interesting. So how did you meet him?
Boulanger was very close to Yehudi, and she was very involved in the founding of the school in ~63. So she really devised the musical curriculum at the school. Really? And I didn't know this at the time, but I mean, literally the day I finished studying her in 1977, I came back over to London, and the same evening I got this phone call offering me a job at the school. And if you talk to Robert Levin, who went to work in Curtis and then at Harvard, he tells the same story. So Boulanger, I think he arrived back in America and was immediately offered a teaching job at Curtis. So he and I have compared notes on that. Anyway, I'd met Menuhin through Boulanger, and then I taught at the school for 3 years as a very young teacher. And in fact, as I went to Stanford, which we were talking about before we all came together, the day I arrived in California, Yehudi was conducting the opening concert of the Louise M. Davies Hall. The hall opened September 1980, and I didn't know him terribly well then, but he just before I left England, I saw him at the school, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said I was going to be in Stanford. He said, "Oh, you must come to the opening concert." And so I went to all the rehearsals that he did in the Louis M. Davies Hall before it opened. I was at the opening concert, and blow me, I went backstage to thank him afterwards, and his parents were still alive and they lived in Los Altos Hills. And he was still, this was Sir Yehudi in his 70s, he was still terrified about what his mother thought of his conducting at the concert, which was a big shock to me, because here he was, one of my idols and mentors, terrified of what his 90-year-old mother thought. And then, our paths crossed down the years. When I came back to England, I wrote a nonette for the school. I was commissioned by the school to write a nonette. So although I wasn't teaching there, I was working with the school. Then I went back and did some more part-time teaching at the school. And then in 98, the school asked me to come back as director of music. And that last year of Yehudi's life, I was working very closely with him. My first few months as director of music. And also Geraldine will remember, actually, his last event in London was at SOAS, when we had those amazing cylinders of Russian klezmer music that he was introducing, with an Israeli academic talking about them. And a few weeks later, he died when he was on tour in Germany, in Berlin, with the Warsaw Symphonia. So through Boulanger, I had that connection to Yehudi, and his daughter Zamira, who's just turned 80, she was one of our trustees, and I've always been very close to her. So there's always been this connection with Yehudi and his family.
Oh, yes. So one of your pieces in the lockdown suite, is that the Zamira in the lockdown suite?
Yes, so that was written for her 80th birthday last year.
That's very nice.
As a present.
And what about Yehudi's 80th birthday concert at the South Bank, was it?
Yes, that was at the Royal Albert Hall.
Royal Albert Hall, sorry.
That was. I think that's the time when I wasn't teaching at the school, and they commissioned me to write this piece. So Yehudi, of course, had his fingers in lots of pies. He was doing a big project with doing singing in schools. He had the Muse Foundation based in Brussels, but there was a version of that in London. So he wanted a piece with 300 school children singing, an octet from the Menuhin School and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. So I got commissioned to write this piece, a short piece in this concert, and he was conducting the rest of the program. With Anne-Sophie Mutter and Rostropovich and goodness, I can't remember who. No, it was Anne-Sophie Mutter certainly in that concert. And I had a big problem finding a text for these children to sing. But his assistant Eleanor came up with a text which was partly some Hölderin German poetry translated to English, and partly lectures that Yehudi had given in South Africa. And we put together this little text for the piece. And then, well, as Alex Knapwell, who's there, I see, will tell you, the first piece ever written for Yehudi was by Bloch, was a setting of Avodah for violin and piano. Yeah. And Alex will tell you, because he told me, it's actually, Bloch didn't write it at all. It's from the encyclopedia, Jewish encyclopedia. He just lifted the chant and added a piano accompaniment. But this was the first piece written for Yehudi. And when Yehudi, as a young boy, went to Germany, he played it in Germany. His father was insistent that he should play this Jewish prayer. It became like his, one of his calling cards as a little boy when he was giving recitals. So, so I include the opening of that Avodah in this piece when there's a line about a song, and so I put that in the orchestra. And then I've used that little quote in. When Yehudi died, I wrote an elegy that was played at his funeral, which we may hear if we have time.
Yes, I think so.
And I quote that Avodah again there. And then I wrote a piece for the opening of the Menuhin School Hall, which we built after Yehudi died. And in that piece, I quote that again. So it's a little quote that I use from Bloch. And Yehudi adored Bloch. He was a young boy. He was the first composer that he ever worked with. And so he had a very special relationship with Bloch.
Yes. So shall we just listen to have we got enough time? We've just sort of hit 6 o'clock. Are we how are we doing? We have a couple
cut off.
Sorry?
I don't think it's a hard cutoff.
No, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to listen to a little bit of this piece, which is about a minute long, just to do with a part of the elegy.
Shall I just introduce it a little bit? So
yeah, oh, hold on a sec. I've shared the wrong thing. Sorry.
when you okay, when you line it up, I'll just introduce it.
Yeah. Well, you can start talking about
Okay,
it.
so Yehudi, I mean, he was only 82 when he died, and it was very, very sudden and unexpected. As I say, he was at COZ just a few weeks before, and he'd been at the school working with the students, and we got this great shock when he died. And I was actually teaching at Guildhall and rushed down to the school, and when I got to the school, the phone rang in my office as I went in there, and it was Zamira, his daughter, saying, "We want to have the funeral at the school. We want him to be buried at the school, and we want it to be a Jewish, if you'll pardon the expression, Jewish funeral," because of course Yehudi was not really involved in organized religion, and his relationship with Judaism was quite complex. And we had a week to organize this funeral and for him to be buried in the school grounds. And the headmaster and I had to handle all this. So this piece was written in a day. I had one day really to write this elegy, and one of the older students played it at the funeral. And we had this, and we had the slow movement of the Bach double, and we had all the violinists in the school playing a Schubert song arranged for multiple violins. So this was played next to the coffin, and actually in lockdown it's been performed a lot. It seems to be very popular because solo pieces are popular. So this was actually recorded by Boris Kucharski, who was a pupil at the school and is now a teacher at the school. It's a wonderful violinist, and he was very close to Yehudi. So playing this piece for him was a very personal thing. So we can probably hear this little excerpt.
So, Malcolm, we've got a very, thanks to you.
Well, that was really moving to hear Boris's wonderful performance of your.
Okay. We've got a clip from a very interesting concert coming up, which is a piece which you called Opening Rites.
Yeah, so after Yehudi died, he had always said when he died, that was the time to raise money to build a concert hall at the school. He was very pragmatic. And he died in '99, and we did, as you'll see, we didn't manage to open the hall until 2005. In fact, 2006 it opened January, and so I created this piece for all the string players in the school for the opening concert of our beautiful concert hall, and this little passage we're going to hear, I quote from my elegy, and then superimposed on that is part of the Bartók solo violin sonata, which Yehudi commissioned from Bartók, but just before Bartók died. And then on top of that, I superimpose that quotation from Bloch as well. So we've got 3 quotations superimposed in this short excerpt. Shall we hear it?
We're going to hear it now. and see it as well. Hopefully. Here we go.
Okay, that's a little bit of it.
That was.
Actually, you don't get the feeling there, but the orchestra, the musicians are all around the audience. They're all around the hall. So some are on the stage, but the others are all around there. So it's a kind of surround sound.
Brilliant. Sounds a bit Cagean to me, perhaps. Oh. Well, it's interesting that there's a sort of a chain of a thread going through all these pieces, linking them all together. That Menuhin, you know, he was an amazing musical personality. I mean, he set up also the music for live. Is it Live Music Now or
Live Music Now? Yes. Yes.
And all these fantastic initiatives to get musicians out there in the community and sort of helping people. And,
he was a great man, and the school represented his ethos. I mean, I always thought that the school, when it was founded, was rather influenced by the kibbutz movement. It was kind of a community of musicians. It wasn't really like a school. It was a community. You know, the students are the young ones, and the teachers are the experienced ones, and we were all there to try and make music together. And certainly, in my time as director of music, that's what I was trying to do there as well. And so I think Menuhin's humanity is still very much part of what the school's about. At least it was in my years as director of music. And I was lucky enough to have some wonderful students there, as you could hear.
Yeah, Malcolm, you mentioned somebody early on in a sort of passing, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more, and it might be a good moment just to bring it back, and that is actually Leonard Bernstein. Because sorry, continuing the Menuhin thought, you mentioned once that he was going to conduct the Bloch, but you were involved in the sort of was it coaching or some sort of
the Bloch Sacred Service.
Sacred service,
Yeah.
And yeah, as a conductor,
Geraldine managed to organise that we would do the Bloch Sacred Service in St Paul's Cathedral. I seem to remember it took many years to set up, and by the time it happened, I'd stopped being director of music at of Zemel. So I think we were talking about it back in the early 90s, but it didn't happen until 96. And Geraldine wrote to Yehudi and said, would he be patron of this concert and come to it? And he wrote back and said, no, I don't want to be patron. I'd like to conduct it. I don't want a fee, but I'd like to conduct it. So as soon as he said he would conduct it, of course, Prince Philip said he'd come in the audience, and Geraldine managed to sell out the whole of St Paul's Cathedral for this concert. But the only problem was that Yehudi didn't know the piece. So I had to coach him. And he told me that he'd been in Paris as a young man. I don't know, Alex will tell us there. Was it written in 35? I think it was finished. But he was... 33. Anyway, Yehudi was in Paris with Ionescu, his teacher, and the phone rang, and it was Bloch saying he'd just finished this oratorio, this sacred service, and would they all come over and hear it? And they all went over to Bloch's house, and Bloch played the piano, and the Menuhin family sang all the parts, and Ionescu was there, and that's the only time Yehudi had ever heard a sacred service. And now he's had this opportunity to conduct it, so he was very, very keen to do it. So I had several sessions with him. This is before I became director of music. It's a couple of years before then. And so I coached him on it, and then he worked with the choirs. It was the Zemel Choir plus another couple of choirs, and it was a great occasion in St Paul's Cathedral. So I was involved in that performance.
Great.
But,
Yeah.
but
If I can say, I had a slight problem, because when I told, he said, "What orchestra are you going to use?" And I said to him, "Well, actually, we're not using an orchestra." You know, we're in St. Paul's Cathedral. There's an organ, and Bloch wrote us a version that you could play with the organ. So it took a little bit of persuading, and he really wanted to perform it, and he really wanted to do it with an orchestra. He was hoping that he might do it with his Polish orchestra at a later stage. But you know, he agreed to do it. And of course, Malcolm worked a lot with the choirs to help the choirs on before Yehudi came along and conducted the performance. So it was a fantastic occasion. So.
And he was a great teacher and totally inspiring, but his beat was very, very all over the place, as any professional musicians will tell you. And the organist was just terrified because he had to play several seconds before the downbeat because of the echo in some places. And you didn't know where the downbeat was. But if you talk to anyone who sang in that, they will tell you it was the greatest experience of their lives, singing under Yehudi. So he had this magical way of bringing things together and making a very special occasion.
So Malcolm, when you were in Paris and you met Leonard Bernstein, did that have something to do with conducting at all, or was it in what capacity did you meet him, and how was he as a personality and a composer? And
he was very, very close to Boulanger. He adored Boulanger. And in fact, when he got the Légion d'honneur, which you get from the French president, you can have it presented to you by anyone who already has it. So he said, "I don't want it from the president, I want it from Mademoiselle." And he was a wonderful photo of him kneeling in front of her while she pins on the lapel of the Légion d'honneur. So he adored Boulanger. And he obviously asked her if he could have 3 or 4 of her students to go. And we went to, that year, we went to a lot of his rehearsals and recording sessions, and I had one-to-one lesson with him in his suite at the Hotel Crillon on the Place de la Concorde. So we had a lot of...
Was it conducting or composing? You say lesson. I mean, what sort of...
Well, I was showing him my music, but generally we sat in on his rehearsals and his recording sessions. He recorded the Schumann Cello Concerto with Rostropovich. He recorded Harold in Italy, the Symphonie Fantastique, La Création du Monde, Mio. I mean, it was an incredible education just seeing him working with the French orchestra and doing, and then he would talk to a group of 3 or 4 of us who spent a lot of time with him that year, and he was incredibly inspiring and a phenomenal musician. I mean, an ear that was incredible and a musical memory.
And really inspiring.
He was very rabbinic. He was always asking questions. He wanted to know what the younger generation thought and why we were writing the kind of music we were writing.
Yeah, so it must have been an incredible experience at the time. And so when you did you ever discuss the Chichester Psalms with him or anything like that? Did you have a chance to do that later on, or
no? I mean, he didn't understand why people didn't want to write tonal consonant music. I mean, he really believed that music and love would save the world, and why. So he conducted Stockhausen and Cage and all the second Viennese. So he conducted the most complicated works, and he could read anything immediately, and I mean, phenomenal. But this was not to his taste, and so the tonality and the consonants of the Chichester Psalms is kind of where he was at home. So we talked a lot about consonance and dissonance, and he was kind of obsessed by the second Viennese school. He wanted to understand Schoenberg, Berg, and Weber. Now, of course he did on one level. He was phenomenal, but he didn't really understand the aesthetic, and he was always struggling to understand that aesthetic.
Yeah, it's interesting you say he was a sort of rabbinic. I mean, the sort of the idea of partly of these conversations is sort of within the framework of the Jewish music studies, where it comes up against a lot of very sort of quite difficult questions about the boundaries or whether they really exist or whether one should be thinking about them at all. But why not? Let's just think about a little bit like Chichester Psalms, a work. I mean, obviously Bernstein's Jewish works. He wrote some liturgical pieces, and he wrote, of course, biblical symphonies, and he's also got a Jewish oeuvre, let's say, with the quotes around it. But the question is, So where does the boundary, where does and the universal come into it? I had the sort of privilege of writing for this Bloch studies, and the big question with Bloch is always about, the Jewish composer, yes, but he was also trying to be universal, consciously, self-consciously, as it were, in a sort of 19th century, late 19th century way. But Bernstein grew up in America, and he had a different type of context. If you're a Jewish composer in Britain? Let me ask you this question: are you when you write a piece of music, you say you're just fulfilling the commission, you're writing for this, but is there an element somewhere in your thinking which is, well, I'm the one who can do this? I mean, you said it in a way in the shtetl thing. You said, well, it's obvious I should choose a shtetl. I should choose that music, not the Scottish one, let's say. Although some Jewish composers might choose the Scottish. Is there something Jewish?
There's a healthy paradox that all composers have, is that they want to be close to their roots, but they also need to be outward looking and be international. And I was lucky enough to study all over the world and work all over the world. So I'm very international, but that doesn't mean that one rejects one's roots. But for Bernstein, I mean, if you come back to this, I mean, Tony Bayfield in his recent book about Judaism, about his theology, he quotes the Kaddish Symphony. He looks at what Bernstein wrote his narration for the Kaddish Symphony, and it's very much in the rabbinic tradition of questioning God and challenging God. And Tony Bayfield talks about this in his book. And of course, Bernstein wrote a Hashkivenu for the Park Avenue Synagogue, so he actually wrote. And even in his mass, he's got Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh in Hebrew in his mass. So there are literally Jewish themes running through a lot of his works. But I think he is quite self-conscious when he's using his Jewish side. He's much less self-conscious when he's writing his musicals, when he's writing West Side Story or On the Town, or even Trouble in Tahiti. But I think British Jews, we're a slightly different kettle of fish. If you think of American Jewish literature, in America everyone's very proud to be Jewish and to show it off in their art. Whereas in England we're slightly more reserved about it.
Yes.
But I'm very happy. I'm very happy to be writing music using Hebrew text and within the Jewish tradition, but I don't make a big thing of it one way or the other. I'm also happy to write my concert works.
So there are lots of questions one could continue to ask you about that topic, but I'm just wondering maybe we sort of round this off and then really open it up a little bit. We were going to end with the last movement of your Chichester Psalms, the Shipley Psalms, but I'm just wondering whether we might do something slightly different, and then actually just hear a couple of minutes of your synagogue music that you wrote in memoriam Hugo Gryn, but then it's also usable at other points. It has a sort of meditative quality. It's the end of the Amida. It's the meditation at the end of the Amida prayer, which is one of the centerpieces of the service. And it goes in a sort of attacca straight into Oseh Shalom, which of course is not your own, or it's not traditional, but as you pointed out, it's actually written by Nathan Hirsch. And you did a lovely arrangement of it, and they go together like companion pieces. And it might just be a nice sort of rounding off of the discussion. Is that we've heard sort of little other types of music, and then we can open it up. We've still got a few minutes, I think. This is a short extract where I will just try and get there very quickly. Technical.
That's
This is it. Yeah. So basically, the background is that it's 1990s. It was written.
This was written when Hugo Gryn died, and Hugo always used to give a sermon every year about how you shouldn't gossip. And then, of course, he was a great gossip. And this little text is, my God, keep my tongue from causing harm and my lips from telling lies. And it's usually a silent moment in the service, but I thought I'd set this text in memory of Hugo.
And what I'll do is I'll just click onto the Oseh Shalom, a little bit of it, an extract as we move onto it. But I'll just try. it's eluding me. This, hold on, I've got to do something here. It's not allowing me to to click. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh, we're somewhere in the middle. Hear the falling round bass, as it were.
Oh.
Just a little shalom to end with on that
Right.
one. We have got other examples if people want to hear them, but I think it's too long. We'll stop, I think, there. But just to say thank you so much for sharing these wonderful stories and explanations and ideas and sort of inspiration, really, creative ideas, and of the working musician, of somebody who's steeped in all sorts of music making, not only composing, teaching, working with musicians, and really living the musical life and breathing music. So, and thank you for all you've done. And as a critic, it's great because I've got loads of stuff to write about. Too much, but
that's not why I do it, Malcolm.
Anyway, it's always great to speak to you, and I always learn a lot. And it's thank you so much. And I'm sure that there'll be other opportunities to talk. But we wish you well, and look forward to the next projects and what's on the
Thank you.
on the horizon.
Can I just thank everyone for being here? It's really, really nice to have so many people. And just to answer, there's a comment that Alex Klein has put in there. It's not a question of not being very proud of being a British juror. It's just we're not quite as extrovert about it as the East Coast Americans tend to be, and that's just kind of, I think, our character and the way we work within British society. But I'm very happy to be placed where I am within the community, and I hope that kind of answers your point.
So, are there any more questions? I don't know whether Laurie or Geraldine want to have been looking at the chat box, or
there have been a couple of questions. I didn't want to interrupt what you guys were talking about at the moment, but two questions that I have seen. One is from Lawrence. Are you optimistic about the future of teaching and performance of classical music among the younger generation, and specifically in the field of Jewish commissioned or composed music?
Yeah, we had that one.
Oh, okay, we covered that. Sorry. And then there was one more.
I'm not sure. Sorry, Laurie. Jakob Fischer's question: where does the name Shipley in the title of the Shipley songs come from?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that one.
Shipley is a village in West Sussex, and actually it has a beautiful church and churchyard where the English composer John Ireland is buried. So a lot of British composers were working down in that area. Vaughan Williams was down there a lot, and particularly John Ireland. And so That's why it's called the Shipley Festival. So it was written for the Shipley Festival, which is why it's the Shipley Psalms. It was in fact, that first performance was in Stenning Church, which is a 13th century church, which is kind of the next village along. And had we sung it in May when we were supposed to this year, it was going to actually be in that Shipley Church. So that's where the name Shipley comes from that place. And it seems a good companion to Chichester Psalms to have the Shipley Psalms.
I like the 99th Psalm.
Thank you.
99. It's very...
Yeah, we didn't have time to listen to that.
I can play it for you. If you want.
I decided to set it as a very gentle one. That Psalm 99 usually gets set as a very loud because it's about the earth shaking and noise. But actually, I decided to do it in a very kind of understated.
The combination between the soloist and the choir and the word of the choir, Kadosh, it's very emotional.
Well, again, this was a little reference to the Chichester Psalms because the idea was to have either a boy soprano or a countertenor, and in this performance, it's a countertenor who sings it beautifully. So I don't know if Malcolm can line it up and we can have a bit of it.
Yeah, I'll do it while you speak.
I mean, it's I don't usually write quite such simple music, but it seemed to work well for this movement. This is going back to Shipley.
This is with the chordal ostinato beneath the soloist. And I've started this extract with the very last 4 notes of the violin solo, which, as you mentioned to me, actually gives the notes to the choir. Is that right?
That's right.
That's the significance.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Can I just say at this moment that to thank, first of all, Malcolm Miller for this concept. The whole idea of having the conversations on Zoom comes from Malcolm Miller. As I said before, he's the one with the ideas. He's thinking of the ideas and helping to put them into action. So it's been a wonderful idea. So many people have grasped the opportunity. And for Malcolm Singer, you know, we've known each other so long, we've worked together, we've done so many, but to spend this time just talking about you and your music has been very special for me, and I'm sure for everybody here, to actually get under the skin of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And that's thanks again to Malcolm Miller for bringing this out from you. So is there anybody else who'd like to still say something to anybody? I probably can't see if you say yes, but if you just want to Rachel.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Malcolm Singer, if a choir wanted to acquire some of your music, how might we go about looking for it or, shopping for it?
The best way, I self-publish, so the best way is to send me an email, which I'm very happy for you to have. It's just malcolm.singer@gmail.com. malcolm.singer@gmail.com, and then we can talk turkey, as they say.
And is there a way sort of to hear samples? So like I could tell a choir director, here's what this guy's music sounds like. What is appropriate for our choir when we start singing again?
Send me an email and I can send you some stuff.
Okay, great. I'll tell him about you then. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that'll be lovely.
Okay, Alex Klein.
I am very, it's been a long time since we've seen each other, but when you're conducting or you're teaching a non-Jewish choir Jewish liturgy, the notes are there and the arrangements, but to get the feeling of the music or the understanding of the language over into a choir and into an orchestra, how do you manage to achieve that? Because it seems that you can feel it in your music, and how do you achieve that? Because it's very, very difficult to explain what things are, what things mean, which is totally different to actually reading notes. So how do you achieve that?
I mean, I'll tell you how Alberto Mizrahi did it. We were doing a concert with the BBC Singers at Spitalfields, and he went down Brick Lane and bought the whole choir bagels, and they loved him. And then every phrase that he thought they were singing wrong, he just sang it to them how it should go. He said, "This is the way we do it. We don't quite do it the way it's written in Jewish music. The written score is only a kind of guide." And he just sang it to them. Of course, the BBC Singers are such amazing musicians; they would just pick up by ear all the little inflections that he wanted. And actually, generally, I mean, that Royal Holloway Choir were just tremendous to work with. They learned it all. I did a couple of rehearsals for that before I conducted it, but their regular conductor had taught it to them all. It's all transliterated, and then I would explain what certain words mean in certain places and where I wanted certain stresses. But I think lots of choirs today are used to singing in lots of different languages. And are very open to being coached on that sort of thing. I mean, my hardest experience ever, I think, was teaching the Israeli opera chorus to sing Chichester Psalms, because they were all Russian and none of them had bothered to learn any Hebrew as far as I can make out. So actually being in Haifa and having to teach a supposedly Israeli choir to pronounce biblical Hebrew was a really interesting experience. But certainly choirs in the UK are very happy to do it. They ask questions all the time. They want to know what each word means, and they want to know where the stress is, and they want to know if they're getting the pronunciation the way you want it. So it's never really been a big issue. But it's something.
It just reminded me with one complete take. I went to Mike Samsinger's Stanley Black and the Orchestra to do a Decca recording in the studio with Naftali Hurstick. So with one complete explanation, he got the Mike Sam singers to sing Kol Nidre, completely one take, and it was done, and out we went, and it was a wonderful experience to see this with professionals, and it just brought this back to me. Thank you.
I can believe that story. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things for me that happened at the conference we did called Magnified and Sanctified on Jewish prayer music in Hanover recently, Benji Fox Rosen is a young American who is was, I hope he still is, the choir conductor at the main synagogue in Vienna, in Sulzer's synagogue at the Seitenstättengassen. And he arrived for the choir and he opened his book the first day and he started conducting, and the choir just looked at him and said, "We don't sing it like that." So now that was a revelation to me, so that nobody sings it like it's in the book. Okay.
I think I ought to say, since Geraldine was thanking me particularly, I'd like to sort of say thank you to Geraldine really for, you know, what's the word? Realizing this idea of these talks, which are really indefatigable. Geraldine, who's really worked a lot to get these the arrangements working, of course, with a team of lots of colleagues, but who we're also grateful to. But it's good to have the opportunity to discuss aspects and different aspects of Jewish music or things touching on that topic in such detail. So so thanks for that, and I'm sure there's going to be loads of follow-up conversations from this. So thanks to everybody for coming.
And please see that you've put your email address on the email list so that we can tell you about what's coming next. And I thank to Mark and to Laurie and to Martha. And, you know, I couldn't do this without the wonderful participant, you know, partners who, you know, Mark Kligman and I have been talking about creating such a forum since 2015, and you know, at last we managed to do it. So I'm grateful to everybody who's put the things in place that made it possible. You know, it's wonderful to make the platform and to see that people come and dance on it. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be discussing what's going to happen to the high holidays and what this means for the future. So hope you'll all be interested to hear the variety. We've got Eric Moses from Canada. We've got Albie Chait from Leeds. We've got Nathan Goldman, who is from Manchester or Liverpool and now is working in Stuttgart. We've got Debbie Kachko-Gray in America. We've got Benny Rogoznovsky from the Park East Synagogue. So we've got a wide variety of people telling us what's going to go on in their synagogues and how this is going to impact in the future. So I hope you'll join us. And if you look on the Humanities Commons site in documents, if you've joined the thing, we always update what's happening, so that you can see a list of all the conversations that are coming up soon. And for compositions, we've got Ofer Ben Amotz going to talk about composition as Midrash in November. And I will send you the whole list of what's going on if I've got your email address. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Laurie and Mark and Martha and everybody for making it possible. Thank everybody for coming, and thank the Malcolms for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to hear Malcolm's music and to hear Malcolm talk about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.